This is In Dark Places. We try harder. I always like those little video clips of Elvis talking about Christmas, and he would kind of jokingly call it Christmas. So I was thinking that we should do a series, since it's almost Christmas time, and call it Christmas Tales. You know, about cryptids and stuff. And yeah, it was kind of lame. And Jimmy came up with the idea of calling it Cryptid Binge. So here we are this week, kicking off Cryptid Binge. All your old favorites are here. We have Bigfoot, Goatman, Dogman. They're all here. So sit around the campfire, turn the lights down, and kick your shoes off, and get ready to have a good time. Right after this week's Nicolas Cage Meltdown of the Week.
The time has come for everyone to clean up their own backyard. Clean up their own backyard. Did you hear that?
Wait! What'd I do? I didn't do nothing, man. What'd I do? You got something to say? I'm about to talk to the cops, huh? Huh?
The Waterford Sheepman is an abominable creature that terrorized the small rural town of Waterford, Pennsylvania, in the early 1970s. It lurked in farms, striking the unwitting animal in a desire to tear it apart and feed on its flesh and blood. Hundreds of people witnessed this creature. It's also referred as Goatman. Marilyn knew of the Goatman legend as a teenager in the 70s, but along with the stories, she had also seen it with her own eyes on more than one occasion. I lived on Baghdad Road, and I saw this figure running across the dirt road at one point near the old sawmill. She remembers that at the time there was so much talk about the legend, with many people catching a glimpse of the creature darting across the road or into the brush along farm fields. She had a second encounter with the monster when she was 17. He was there that one night. I drove home, and right before I turned into my driveway, there he was, running across the road and into the woods. Waterford native Richard Galbraith knows the legend well, and as a child he was told, "Don't let the sheepman get you." He was warned to avoid the area of Pennsylvania Route 19 on the outskirts of the city at night, or else the same fate would befall him that happened to so many unwitting animals. The blood-crazed sheepman would tear him apart. Richard was wise to take the warnings to heart, for there were many alleged incidents of the sheepman violently attacking humans, as well as ravaging livestock. Herb Keeney, a Waterford native and businessman, knew the terror of the sheepman firsthand. He had a friend who was a victim of the ungodly creature, as it lay wait for him on top of the Waterford-covered bridge on 9 Mile Road that spans the Bluff Creek. Herb recounts the story in his own words. "It was always said the sheepman lived in a cave on Baghdad Road. He was known to frequent the covered bridge southeast of town on East Street. He was said to hide up in the rafters of the old bridge and jump down and terrorize young lovers that had parked in the bridge. 2 couples from Erie were traveling into the bridge late one night in a dark blue Ford Mustang convertible with the top down. It had started to sprinkle, so they pulled inside the bridge to put the top up when they were attacked. The boys fought off the creature and peeled out, filling the bridge with smoke from the burning rubber of their tires. The roof to the car was damaged, ripped, torn, and mangled to the point it had to be replaced. All 4 of the young people insisted the incident really happened, telling the tale to their parents. The parents, fearing embarrassment, would not allow any police report to be filed. Nevertheless, the countryside surrounding Waterford was abuzz in the 1970s with stories and sightings of the creature known as Sheepman. It seemed the legend faded with the decade, for there have not been many sightings of the creature since the close of the 70s.
Well, this story from the New York Post was published almost exactly a year ago today. November 22nd, 2021, by Katie Davies. Thanks, Katie. Headline reads, Man claims he was stalked by terrifying Dogman monster in Australian outback. A man has bizarrely claimed he was stalked by a terrifying Dogman monster in the Australian outback, and even says he has picture proof. The fisherman, called John, wildly claims he was left petrified for a month after encountering the supposed half-dog, half-human creature on 2 separate occasions. Speaking on the Believe Paranormal and UFO podcast, the Aussie insisted he was followed by what he has branded a dogman, and claims he thought he was going to be killed. John was fishing from his kayak on Boxing Day last year when he said the first incident happened. I noticed that every time I took a stroke with the paddle of my kayak, whatever the thing was, it was taking a stride to match each paddle I was taking, he said. I stopped for a bit, and the sound stopped in the bush too, and I thought it was a bit odd. So I took off paddling again, and sure enough, as soon as I started to paddle every stroke, this thing would take a step. So whatever it was, this thing was following me. It wasn't a coincidence or anything, it was more of a stalk. Freaked out, John took a snap and claims he captured the dogman on camera. The creature, I actually got it in the photo. What I think it is, I've spoken to a few people, and I reckon it's a dogman, he added. After that, I couldn't go back to the area to check it out myself. I was petrified for probably a month after that. I was waking up in the middle of the night, seeing the creature in my dreams. Although he was petrified, John once again returned to the bush for another fishing trip, and says he heard a bit of a bang followed by the sound of someone or something running. As it was running, it was smashing trees out of the way, he added. I don't know if they were breaking or it was just hitting them. You couldn't see what the bush was like because it was so thick. John said the dogman then started to roar as he spent 10 minutes trying to escape back to the safety of his car. I never heard anything like that in my life, he said. It would roar, and then it would take a breath in, but the breath in that it was taking was actually louder than the roar it was doing. This creature just went to another level, and it was crazy. I could hear in my head something saying, "Go now, or you'll die." It wasn't my own voice, my own consciousness, it was something else. That 10 minutes was probably the longest in my whole life. I thought I was going to be killed. I had no weapons, didn't have my fishing knife, no phone service. Despite his outlandish claims, John has insisted he's not barking up the wrong tree with the suggestion of a dogman existing, and fears someone could get hurt. I've heard about it, the dogman, and thought it was a joke, but actually I've had encounters with it now, and it's terrifying. I wouldn't be putting myself out showing these photos if it was fake, or I didn't know that there was something actually there. That's the main reason I came forward. I'm worried that someone's going to go missing or get hurt, and I'll have it in the back of my mind that I didn't say anything about that.
This is a newspaper article that I found in our friend Dave Spink's book, West Virginia Bigfoot. So be sure to check out Dave's book. It's got tons of good stories in it. The article says, it's not always things that go bump in the night which leave us scratching our heads, but sometimes things which leave footprints in the snow. Bill Parker of Salt Sulphur Springs admits to being a bit puzzled last Tuesday afternoon when he stepped out into his yard and noticed a strange set of footprints in the 10 or 12 inches of powdery snow which had fallen throughout the day on Monday. The tracks seemed to consist of single left and right prints, as might be made by a person, but somewhat larger. The soft snow left little detail in the prints themselves, but there was something distinctly odd about them. Though the tracks were fairly close together as they climbed up the bank from the road to his yard, they stretched out in a pretty unnatural spread as they continued up across the lawn to the top of the hill and into the woods. Parker measured several of the strides. Many were in the range of 68 to 70 inches, and the longest stretched 75 inches, hill to hill. Monroe native Sean Crozier, currently with the Kanawha County Sheriff's Department, checked out the tracks the following day. Crozier was said to be stumped by the tracks as well, but did obtain a hair sample for testing by following the tracks on into the woods above the Parker house. And Bill Parker's sighting took place on February 24th, 2015 in Monroe County, West Virginia. It's a pretty crazy story. Dave Spinks says in the book, whenever he interviewed Bill, that he often hears strange noises coming from the woods behind his house, like wood knocking and unexplained screams and howls. It can be pretty creepy. And his son has been hearing those noises as well. So what's going on up in Monroe County? And again, check out our friend Dave Spinks at DaveSpinksParanormalInvestigator.com. All one word.
Terrified witnesses tell of creepy dogman creatures prowling in woods and prairies. Described as having the head of a German shepherd, the dogman creatures have been reportedly seen across the United States and Canada in terrifying encounters. Dozens of people have shared their terrifying encounters with creatures lurking in the woods and prairie lands known only as dogmen. Reports of the bizarre creature, described by different witnesses as having a head resembling a German shepherd and glistening strong muscles, have circulated since the 1880s. Unlike dogs, however, the monster is said to be able to walk on their hind legs as well as all fours and have long arms. Several people have shared their stories of encountering the creatures armed with razor-shaped claws and teeth, including park rangers and high court judges in the U.S. and Canada. One person from Ohio said, "People need to be aware of these things. They are as real as it gets, and they are dangerous. I have always loved nature. I love the woods. I love hiking and camping and fishing. On this occasion, I was by a lake for 15 minutes when all of a sudden this overwhelming feeling of dread came over me. I switched my headlamp on to turn around to start back up the riverbank, and right behind me, a big sycamore tree. I saw what looked to be a very large animal kind of kneeling beside it. As I locked my eyes on it, I completely froze. I knew I was definitely seeing something there, but my mind couldn't process it. What I was looking at didn't make any sense. I kept saying to myself, animals aren't supposed to look like that. Right as I'm thinking this, it's as if this thing read my mind, stood up, and made itself perfectly invisible. You know the monsters your parents told you weren't real and couldn't hurt you? I've heard of the Dogman before, but never took it seriously. These things are perfectly adapted killing machines. The way the arms and legs looked, it looked like it was perfectly adapted to walk on all fours as well as on two legs. This experience has torn a huge hole in me. Another person who shared their experience in Georgia said he was rafting with friends when he had to answer the call of nature. When he stopped in a clearing, quotation, a genetically mixed entity of man, wolf, and primate, end of quotation, suddenly stepped out. He said, I spent 21 years in the army, all over the world and in 3 different theaters of war, and I have barely slept at all since seeing this thing, an enormous canine-type creature. I can still taste the fear in my throat and my own vomit. I am 6 feet tall and about 250 solid pounds, and this thing dwarfed me, at least 7'6", and maybe 350 to 400 pounds. As a former college and semi-pro football player and powerlifter, I know about big people and about strength and musculature, and this was no normal creature that evolved somehow in that environment. I can promise you, this is not something anyone would want to encounter twice. Another witness, a deputy sheriff, said, There ain't many things in the world that scare me, but simply I've seen some shit in my days, but nothing prepared me for that night. I recall there was a search for a young man sucked into the storm drain, and I parked my cruiser at what I believe was the electric company storage yard. About 5 minutes pass before I hear a snorting, almost sniffing sound coming from the other side of the tracks. I turned my light on, and to this day I wish I hadn't. It had pointed ears and a long muzzle, and it looked me right in the face before it bolted into the timber. It was not a mask, and it was not a person in a costume. Who would walk up to an armed man with a police radio in full uniform and risk getting shot? I remember it was surreal, so final, I guess.
The summer of 1969 was hot and humid in Torrent County. Back then, the area near Greer Island wasn't gated off like it is now. Teenagers would go down Shoreline Road around the lake to be alone and enjoyed the freedom of summer nights. On July 9th, a group of 3 couples were parked by a clearing. After midnight, a beast leapt out onto their car from the trees above. The monster tried to grab one woman, but they sped off before it could take her away, the witnesses said. We've had reports about this thing for about 2 months, a police dispatcher told the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, but we've always left them off as pranks. But an 18-inch gash in the car's side and the terrified nature of the witnesses led police to open a full investigation. It appeared in the newspapers the next day, and the area was immediately caught in monster fever. Truckloads of men with guns headed toward Greer Island to hunt the thing. Spectators came out in droves to try to catch a glimpse of it. Reporters swarmed in, and police tried to keep the peace. Rick Pratt, director of the Greer Island Nature Center at the time, remembers folks coming out with wine, whiskey, and beer to have a good time and hunt for the creature. It was a Sasquatch of our very own, said Pratt. It was a party, so let's go. On the night of July 10th, a few dozen people were at a clearing known for dumping near the lake when the monster made another appearance. It appeared on a cliff, looked angry, and threw a tire 500 feet. Everyone, including a group of sheriff's deputies, ran away in fear. One witness said the monster gave off a pitiful cry, like something was hurting him. Craig Woolheater was 9 that summer. He was fascinated with monsters, dinosaurs, and UFOs. He clipped out the newspaper stories about the Lake Worth monster scare and kept them in a scrapbook. Years later, while driving through Louisiana, he saw something unexplainable. In his headlights, he said he saw the gray body of a huge primate on 2 legs. He became a believer and started the Texas Bigfoot Research Center in 1999 to study and educate people about the elusive creature. Today he lives in Mansfield and is a full-time cryptozoology blogger. He believes the Lake Worth monster was a real creature, like ones that have been spotted all over the country, stopping in the area because of its viable habitat. I personally think it's an undiscovered, uncatalogued primate species that walks on two legs, he said. According to legend, the Lake Worth monster lives on the shores of the West Fork of the Trinity River. It can swim, climb trees, and eats fish and chickens. It is 7 feet tall and has unhuman strength. Some reports say it has horns sprouting from its head, giving the monster the moniker of Goatman. Moniker.
Winged humanoid sighting reported by Austin, Texas resident. An Austin, Texas resident recalls his sighting of a winged humanoid that he saw gliding over his house. The description was similar to those of winged humanoids seen in the Chicago area. In 2019, one of my older cousins and I were standing outside of my house here in Austin, Texas. He was having a cigarette. It was about 9 p.m. and we'd pretty much run out of things to talk about. I opted for just looking into the night sky and gazing for the Big Dipper, it being the only star I could typically spot right away. As I'm looking up, I notice a dark silhouette about 10 feet from the top of my house. I live in a 2-story home, so 10 feet from my roof is pretty high up, yet still close enough for me to still see. I could vividly see that it was the shape of a human-like being flying from above my home and over to across the street and then out of sight. It moved smoothly across the sky, not too fast, just a glide. I stared in disbelief, unable to speak. Long after it vanished behind my neighbor's home, I still looked in its direction, trying to understand what just happened. When I was finally able to gather my thoughts enough to talk, I turned to my cousin, who was also looking into the sky, and said, "Let's go inside." He put out a cigarette, and we both walked into the house and sat in silence for about 5 to 10 minutes. The silence was broken by the sound of my cousin taking in a deep breath before asking me, "Did you see something flying outside?" Before he could finish, I burst out into rapid sentences about what I saw. Before I knew it, we were going back and forth and barely letting each other get a word out. We decided that what we saw was real and it really did happen. That's not the most frightening part, though. Several weeks later, I stumbled across a TV show on Destination America entitled Monsters and Mysteries in America, I believe. The episode I watched turned out to be based on sightings in Austin, Texas. I couldn't believe it. The episode was about flying humanoids being spotted here in the city. It confirmed for me that what I saw was actually real, and I hadn't been one of the only ones who spotted it. I still look to the sky on most nights. I know they're still out there.
Hey, Monsters and Mysteries. I used to love that show. That was great. And it's 5 o'clock somewhere, but in Letcher County, Kentucky, it's still about 4:30. I don't know. But hey, Letcher County, that's not too far from me. Nonetheless, Doug Adams is doing what he often does, nursing an afternoon beer at the local bar and telling tales. Adams is, he says proudly, one of the longest tenured teachers in Letcher County. He teaches art at Letcher County Central High School and is a big lover of folklore, just like his father was. He spoke at length about the strange things, shapes in the woods, mysterious balls of light he's seen over his time growing up in eastern Kentucky. But one of the strangest things he saw were the little people. They were little brownies, said Adams. Little bitty people that lived in those cliffs around the area here. It said the little people live in the ridges deep in the limestone caves of Pine Mountain. And, hey, Exhibition Bigfoot was over at Pine Mountain, and they got some good evidence. And I want to drive over to Pine Mountain one day and kind of look around and check it out. There's some crazy stuff going on at Pine Mountain. Now then, some call them goblins. So did a group of documentarians who once attempted to summon them in Hellier, Kentucky. Hey, I remember those guys. But Adams always called them brownies, like his father did. Oh, my dad, he was big into those kinds of things, said Adams. He would tell us, now you just got to be quiet. You can't be noisy, they'll disappear. He never said before they went, but they would disappear. Go probably back into the rocks, or what have you. Adams said that like many cryptid legends, the brownies, goblins, or little people are likely rooted in the folklore of the land's indigenous Cherokee people, who called them the Yunwi Sunsdi. The term is also likely connected to Scottish folklore. All around Lancaster County, since the rivers and creeks rose in July, there have been rumors that the creatures were seen by the roadways. Here in Hemphill, there in Whitesburg, displaced like so many by high water coming into their homes. Some people swear by it. Doug thinks that's a little rich, though. They may have just had one or two too many, he laughed. Ho, ho, ho. That was his laugh.
Amarillo zookeeper verifies what he calls a werewolf captured on a security camera. A zookeeper at the Amarillo Zoo posted an anonymous report and description about the werewolf captured on the security camera. He verifies the event and subsequent incidents. Before we get started, I'm writing this on a burner account for anonymity. I could get into real trouble for doing this since I'm revealing information that only the Amarillo Zoo management really knows. Before we get hired, most of us sign a DNA. It's the standard stuff, but it means if anyone finds out who wrote this, I could be in some serious legal trouble. I attempted to post this on 4chan, but it was largely ignored or told me that I was a liar. Maybe you guys will hear me out, though. Even if you don't, I need to get this out of my mind. So, about this photo, and if you guys look it up, it's Amarillo Zoo werewolf. You can find it. So about the photo, it's a photo from security camera footage at the zoo. As you all probably know, the city finally released it to the public on Twitter because, long story short, they're frightened. We all are. I've never believed in the supernatural or cryptozoology, seeing as I've been working with and studying real animals for most of my life. But I don't have words for what we've experienced lately. I'm genuinely incapable of explaining it. Science doesn't touch events like this, and I'm at a loss to explain it beyond the conclusions we've all come to, which I'll explain later on. All of this started about 2 months ago. Back in April, I was with a few other zookeepers doing the usual routine, cleaning up pens, feeding the animals, and whatnot. It was somewhat late at night after closing time, around 11 p.m. or so. I'm filling the feed in the exotic bird area when I notice 2 or 3 parrots are dead. This was obviously concerning to us, as we all care a lot about animals we care for. We aren't exactly flush with cash, and the Amarillo Zoo, although popular, doesn't make a lot of money. Losing critters out of nowhere can be a real blow to revenue, since it can cost a lot to replace the animals. Anyways, I'm getting off track. The point is, birds are dead. Out of nowhere, I might add. It was only a few, sure, but if they kept dropping off like that, it would be bad news. So I let the other zookeepers know about it, and we decided to search the cage. Perhaps some little kid had fed the birds something poisonous, or maybe there was an illness or virus spreading among the birds. This was nothing too big, so when we let management know about it the next day, they basically shrugged it off. We sent the carcasses to a vet to get them tested anyways to see what killed them. Well, the test at the vet's office did not turn anything back. Like at all. No poisons, no evidence of illness even. Not so much as a feather out of place. They just kind of dropped dead. It was weird, but we sort of forgot about it. A few weeks later, we find more animals dead. We find 3 goats, largely in the same manner as the birds. We got them tested too, because clearly this was not something random. Management catches wind of this, so we start beefing up security and keeping an eye on visitors. We start making more announcements to not feed the animals, etc. You guys might not know this, but zookeepers have a pretty demanding schedule. It can vary by the zoo, but many of us sleep in bunks at the zoo so we can take care of the animals 24/7. You know, in case a lion or chimp breaks out and we need to make another Harambe meme, which was tragic, by the way. We tend to rotate in schedules, so each of us gets the chance to sleep at home a few days a week. So in addition to the other stuff, we start taking turns watching the security footage at night. The deaths don't stop happening, though. And we aren't seeing anything at night. In early May, we noticed a few of the sheep in our petting zoo section missing. They just straight up vanished. It was very frustrating. By this point, we start getting the police involved. We call them up and tell them what's happening. They said they'll leave an officer around along with our security to watch things at night until the weird stuff stops happening. Us zookeepers start really watching our security cameras too. Whatever was happening, it was probably some crafty creep who got a kick of killing animals for fun. I and my colleagues were getting aggravated too. The animals were clearly stressed, and a few of them stopped eating regularly. We hated the thought of someone trying to hurt our innocent animals for fun. Well then, the real scary stuff started happening. We get up in the morning and find the sheep that were missing, or what was left of them. Their skins were all found, strewn about the sidewalk near the zoo's entrance. We knew it was our sheep because their ID tags were included with the fur. Police said they didn't see anything the night before. Security says the same thing. We are all baffled. We managed to get it all cleared up before the zoo opens. We decide to keep the strange happenings under wraps so as not to alert the individual doing this. We don't want them to know we're onto it. A full day passes without incident. We had a normal day the next day too, when at night I hear a bunch of shouting. It was around 2 a.m., and the security guard is running for his life. He's shouting for the cops and is shaking all over. Says he saw something climb over the wall to the lion exhibit. Says it was covered in fur. The police have him show us where it's at, and when we all get there, there's nothing. We check the security footage, and all we manage to capture is some movement in the darkness in the lion's area. The security guard is crying now, saying it was a werewolf. We laugh him out of the room. He keeps insisting it was a werewolf. Like something out of Harry Potter, he says. We laugh at him. We're sure at this point it was probably some coyote that managed to find a way into the zoo at night. The sheepskin was weird, but maybe the thing had been eating the carcass nearby in the wooded area by the zoo. It is called Thompson Memorial Park. It's small, but it could hide a coyote or two. The incidents don't stop, though. We start finding organs in the enclosures, just out of nowhere, and they weren't random. Intestines in the shape of a heart on the floor of the porcupine exhibit. 2 sheep eyeballs in the holes of our wooden fences. We had been watching the cameras, and we couldn't really see anything except for quick flashes of white from time to time. The animals were still acting strange. Normally, friendly animals suddenly just stayed in their sleeping areas, even when fed. We were really freaked out at this point, and the police started sending more officers to patrol the zoo at night. It all culminated on May 21st. It was 3 a.m., the usual night. It was quiet out, and I was watching the cameras with a security guard. We were looking at one of the outside cameras when we noticed it. The photo above, which hopefully you'll look up, captures exactly what we saw. I was stunned when I saw it. At first, it sort of reminded me of that clown who was walking around during the 2021 Capitol riots in D.C., some guy wearing a coyote pelt on his body. But it wasn't right. His limbs were strangely animalistic, and yet still strangely human. Not only that, but I don't know if any of you noticed, it was holding some kind of stick. It was doing this weird freeze jerking motion. It would pace and then freeze. It would stay perfectly still. Then it would jitter about and start pacing again. We phoned the police, obviously, and say there's an intruder on the fence, that it might be our guy. Well, 3 or 4 officers go right towards the fence. I'm out there since I want to see this individual get arrested. The police decide to split up and they point their guns at it. They start yelling at it to stop right where it is and not move, and that it was under arrest. Oh, I'd like to see that. The thing starts heaving. The security footage uses night vision, so it may seem like we could see it easily, but in real life it was pitch black out. They get their flashlights out and point them at this thing. It's the scariest thing I've ever seen in my life. Eyes totally devoid of color, just milky white, like some kind of demon. Sharp teeth. I begin to wonder if that security guy was right after all. Maybe it was some sort of werewolf. But I had some time to think about it, and the moon wasn't full that day. It sounds childish and dumb, but when you've seen something so unexplained, you start grasping for straws trying to figure it out. So the thing is making this jittery movement, and it starts to make a rattling sound, sort of like when you hear sprinklers go off in your yard. The thing is furry, and the police start yelling louder because it is moving towards the officers on the other side of the fence. It starts screaming, and it was the most god-awful sound, like boiling a puppy alive. The officers are terrified like we all were, and they start shooting at it. I've never seen anything like it. Thinking about it now makes me want to cry. Like, seriously, it took 5 shots dead center in the chest and to the head, and it didn't even flinch. The officers see this and shoot at it more, but it just takes it without so much of a flinch, still screaming, but louder now. It suddenly moves lightning fast and is on the other side of the fence. I gasped and started running. I could hear its screams and the rattling. The officers realize their guns are useless against this thing, and they start backing away. We all start booking it back up to the zookeeper's bunk area. We sat in that room, and the officers called in backup. Meanwhile, the thing was jerking its way around the enclosure and making its way around the zoo. We waited in the security camera room, watching the security cameras and waiting for the other police to come. We watched this thing walk in the zoo like it's nothing, jittering around in its weird way. We could hear it screaming to some extent still. Suddenly, we watch as the thing vanishes. I can't really describe it. It was there, and then suddenly it wasn't. You might have noticed the zoo put out a statement saying no animals had died. That's technically true but only because we had listed the earlier deaths as natural. That was before we realized they weren't. I'm typing all this right now on little sleep. I haven't been able to sleep well since I've seen that thing's eyes. I finally had a day or two off zoo duty, so I'm at home typing this. I'm using a VPN, so hopefully no one can trace this post back to me. But maybe, I suppose, I shouldn't mind if I get fired. Truth is, at this point, I'm not sure I want to go back.
You mentioned that guy at the January 6th thing. What was his deal? Why did he sort of become their spokesperson or something? He was everywhere. Even to this day, when there's an article about January 6th, it always has his picture on it. Yeah, I call BS. That guy was a government plan or something. Hey, thanks for listening to Cryptid Binge. We really appreciate you guys. Thanks as always, Mr. Jimmy Haunted. We're going to have a special guest on the show next week for some more Cryptid Binge, so you don't want to miss that. If you got a true cryptid encounter you'd like to tell, be a guest on the show, send an email to indarkplacespod@hotmail.com. We'll see you again next week. God bless you.